Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. And we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a guest with a story of unwavering commitment to duty and country. On January 31st, 2001, my guest took his first steps into a world of service, donning the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. As a platoon sergeant in conventional infantry operations, he led with integrity and compassion, guiding his fellow Marines through the trials of war and ensuring their readiness for whatever challenges lay ahead. As a Marine Raider with the Marine Special Operations Command, his valor knows no bounds. For over 12 years, he faced the crucible of combat with unyielding resolve, navigating the chaos of war with grace and determination. And on January 31st, 2021, he bid farewell to his 20-year career with the United States Armed Forces. He left behind a legacy of honor and sacrifice, but his journey was far from over. Today, he stands as a beacon of hope and resilience, embracing a new mission as the co-owner and director of operations at Trident Coffee Roasters LLC in Imperial Beach, California, and a graduate of the University of Southern California MBV program. His unwavering spirit continues to inspire all who encounter him. Join us in the studio this week as we explore and celebrate the indomitable spirit of those who serve. Please welcome into the studio, Derek Mensen. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, how we doing, DJ? Appreciate that warm welcoming.
Yeah, man, I'm so happy that you're here, and we have so much to talk about because you have the shortest long career that I've ever seen, and I'll explain as we get deeper into it, but it strikes me as so funny when we talk about how you did this career, but you had so much planned ahead of time of knowing, hey, I'm coming to the end of the road. We've got to get stuff set in place. And I don't think a lot of people know about that. But let's do as we always do. Let's go back to the 80s. Iowa, you're a kid there. Rambo. I think it's the greatest decade to ever be alive for movies and things like that. Let's talk about what set you down this path, because I know that other than some uncles by marriage, you didn't really have anyone in the military. So let's talk about what set you down this path.
Funny you mentioned Rambo. He was actually one of my inspirations for the military. So originally I was always like, I wanted to be a cop or a firefighter. And then I started watching the likeness of, Predator, Rambo, Platoon. And something about that it just consumed me. And I just was always running around and, trying to make my own punji pits and stuff from Predator and, things like that. No joke, taking a piece of, branches that can bend, and put a twine string on there from bales of hay and making arrows and, just silly stuff like that kids do. And made that into a reality per se.
I've never heard as a kid of someone making a punji pit, but let's talk about your thoughts behind that and the punji pit, because I would think with that young and going that in depth into it, because a lot of kids play combat, they play war, they play cops and robbers. But it seems almost like you were engrossed with it.
A little bit. I guess more, engrossed, infatuated. I just was thinking about like how effective it was in results. A lot of that came from Predator, obviously, a little bit alien based, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, what's not to love. So yeah, I mean, I'd always imagine myself in those weird scenarios, and everybody wants to be the hero type thing. And that's kind of really what snowballed from there, if you will. And growing up a little further, go through adolescence, I got a little more involved as my older brother actually went into the Army. However, he had gotten really sick during their final, physical fitness test. He was not able to pass it because he had got really sick. He was puking, lost a lot of weight. And they gave him an option of starting over at training day 1, or, hey, you can get out with your D214. He's like, well, I'm not starting over again. He's like, screw you guys, I'm going home. And that was the long and short of it, because up until that point, because we were only 2 years apart. Fun fact, same birthday, but 2 years apart. He or not him, but I was in with the same recruiters that brought him in, and I was like going in on a ranger contract type thing. Was already signed up as a sophomore, and after that happened with him, I was like, well, I don't want to deal with leadership like that. Or at the time, I just said people like that. I didn't, talking about hires and leadership that comes later. So I literally went to the recruiting office. They're in the same recruiting office. I told the Army I was no longer interested. I walked straight across the hall, and it was the easiest sell in history for the Marine Corps. I walked in, and I'm like, I don't care about education or bonuses. I just want infantry. Sign me up.
Wow, so you beat him to the punch of you get the honor of being a U.S. Marine. Because I've heard so many guys on the show where they say they went there and they're like, hey, the Army's offering me this, the Navy's offering me this. And they're like, we're going to offer you the chance to be a Marine, and that's all we're offering you. So when you go in and you do this sell, and that was what was kind of confusing to me because you joined actually before you graduated from high school. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You had already known before ever graduating, and it was like your first semester, or I guess it'd be in your second semester of your senior year, that you're going active duty after it's over. So can we kind of talk about the mind state of that? Because that's really laying it out there ahead of time.
Knowing I was going in, because I went in delayed entry program, it was actually March of 2000. So almost a full year before I went active. So just knowing I was going, and it really did start changing my mindset going through they, what was it? Once a month, they do the delayed entry program where you'd go there and they would, try to teach you some knowledge or go to little events or obstacle courses. And of course, go on a run or something like that, conditioning wise. And it really started changing my focus about what I was going to go into. And it even had effects on athletics. Like I always was out for football, and like I started for a couple of years, and then I kind of wavered off because other things were more important to me in high school. Even though I stayed with football, I played, and I ended up getting a lot more playing time my senior year because I was actually more disciplined because I was actually thinking about those consequences and listening to those instructions. And that was a result of actually going through the delayed program, which it didn't really hit me until now, that correlation, until you actually just asked me that mindset going into it. So that's probably when it started shifting.
I got to ask you, when you say that you were getting kind of your mindset changed and all of that kind of stuff, I want to kind of fast forward real quick into your career. And as you got to the end, and I'm going to compare kind of the end of your career to the end of high school. Okay. And
Okay.
I want to ask if there's kind of characteristic traits that stay there, because you said you were always kind of into it and you were into your career at the very end, but you knew that there was other stuff coming. You knew that other stuff was about to happen. Do you think that that's kind of followed you throughout your life, where you see the end of the road and you're already planning to hit that next one?
Yeah, I would think so. Like the mindset of just preparedness, like not being able to tell the future, but being ready for it, or at least having, your, like you said, your primary, secondary, tertiary, your contingencies all laid out to making sure you're setting yourself up for success, which is obviously you've seen, I'm sure, in law enforcement and military, that a common thing is people will, the military use you and spit you out until that last day if you let them. And or they'll go up to the last couple months, and that's still not enough time to fully, get prepped for transition at any means. And so that's definitely stayed with me, I think, to help me as far as just being organized to create that structure for myself from the beginning all the way to transition from the military into the civilian world again.
Now, another factor that we need to look at, you joined in March of 2000, so you're already set up for, to leave. 9/11 happens, right after your senior year, so you're already on board. But I think that changes the look of your military career from the jump. Do you agree?
I would agree to an extent, yeah, because it may have triggered me staying in longer. I don't know. It may have triggered me to want to move units per se or not. Like, let's say that didn't happen. I could have been like, maybe I just was okay with what I've done and maybe I got out. I don't know. I always know I was going to do 4 years for sure and then see what happens. And like you said, that changed the trajectory of everything and your mindset and your owed and duty to country, right? And I almost felt cheated at the time. And I think what sprung me into even staying longer, at least for this first, because I was like, I've not, there's part obligation, yes, but also the pride and desire to, protect and serve as a civil servants, as we all know, is because I was originally at Annapolis, Maryland. It was a battalion from 8th and I Battalion, actually, in Security Forces Company. Was my very first duty station. It was 2 years long, and I was at the Naval Academy doing security forces stuff. And we were actually on the reactionary team for the Pentagon when that got hit and was up in smoke. So that was a surreal moment as well. And when all that happened, I'd only been there for getting out of SOI. So that would have been June, July, August, September. So 4 or 5 months. And so I had to sit there and, do what we could do to, protect, what we were supposed to do as far as the security goes for, stateside for CONUS, but always on the back end, ramping up and doing more things to get prepared to go to a victory unit afterwards.
Well, and I think it's a very big dichotomy right there of what you talk about when you go to the Naval Academy, because I think with how you went in, with what you told them, 0311, right off the bat, I'm not worried about anything else. And then they send you to the Naval Academy. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you say it was a cool assignment, but I'm pretty sure in talking to you and the discussions that we've had, that probably wasn't the best alternative that could have happened for you. And it might have been a kick to the nuts right away. So I want to talk about that dichotomy of where you look at that and you say, oh man, I'm at the Naval Academy. And then 9/11 happens and you are at the front line. You have front row tickets to that. And you're mm-hmm. seeing that happen and how we responded. So can we talk about the difference in your mindset of thinking I'm at the Naval Academy and then seeing it from the front row?
Sure. Just seeing that, it's not surreal. It brings everything to light as we were vulnerable, right? It's showing how, one, unprepared we are as a nation or as a force at that time, to what we had to do to be more prepared. And it was literally like treating, there's people we'd see every day going through those gates, right? Especially at the Naval Academy, you got a lot of the same rotations. And that's when the DoD stickers were big in play. And it was to the part where treating them not treating them like an enemy, but question authority everywhere, because as that sentry, you had that authority. So it was making sure they had their credentials, making sure their stickers right. I remember scraping lieutenant colonel stickers off of a spouse's wife and then them calling the command, getting all pissed off about it. But, they weren't following regulations, and that was what we had to do to make sure that they were safe. So it was just a complete shift on just, hey, happy-go-lucky, come in, see the Naval Academy, to, hey, this is real. And it was crazy, the mind shift on that, and seeing it from that perspective, it just changed everything going forward.
Let's talk about a lighter note of you in a sentry position. I think that you were the ones that stopped the recruits that were in the Naval Academy if they were late coming back to the Naval Academy. And you ran across a guy that you didn't let in because he was late, and it came back to bite you in the ass later on.
Some would say, so you did your homework. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's a good story. That is correct. And this person that it came back to bite me in the ass. So we were shutting the gate, and the midshipmen, they're a young college, but some of them are also prior enlisted, so should know better or whatnot. But gate 1 is the main gate, right, that goes in the Naval Academy, and that's right down from downtown Annapolis. And so you get the majority of midshipmen coming in from back there, whether it's they're allowed to drink or not, or just being out, just being goofballs. And literally, this is how disciplined or strict we were, watching the watches, ticking down, it's almost midnight or whatever time it was it closed. And I remember looking down the sidewalk and seeing 3 midshipmen sprinting towards the gate, and literally yelling at them like, hey, you got 30 seconds, 10 seconds. I would count them down. And I remember counting it down, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 2 of them made it in. And from my recollection, the last guy's coming in, and one hit, he didn't make it. Door shut from him. I was like, sorry, man, you didn't make it. Lo and behold, they get written up for that. And it can actually hurt them in a while if it happens too many times. So not that I didn't feel bad about it at the time. But what came back in after a year, once I went to a victory unit, That same guy I shut out happened to be my first second lieutenant in the infantry. So he was a fresh butter bar out. And I remember seeing, we shook hands and looks at me and goes, I remember you. I was like, oh shit.
What rank were you when you finally met him, active
I
duty?
was E4 or a corporal at the time. So,
So I guess you mended fences with that and moved on with your career because it didn't seem to affect you too bad.
yeah, so we got to share, breaking our combat cherries together and mending fences that way. So obviously being reliant and loyal to each other in that way, which was really good. I mean, the workup, it was mended within the first couple months because I was one of his squad leaders. He was so we, you know, whether any officer wants to admit it or not, they do rely on their leadership's help and leadership and experience. So through that, and we got through it. We actually look back and laugh at it. So
That's a
and
good
then
thing. Do you still talk to him to this day?
I've talked to him off and on. It was fun. We kind of follow each other through our career. Not to go off segue or what you wanted to talk about, but so from there, that's how we knew each other there. And then I was at Victor 3-3 that we were out of Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, where we met each other and went to Afghanistan with each other. And then we separated. It was like 10+ years, and come to find out, he ended up going the recon route, ended up in MARSOC. And then when I was a student at ITC, the individual training course for MARSOC to become a Marine Raider, he was the officer in charge of SOTC 2, which is the DA phase. And I was like, I run into you again. It was pretty wild. But
What years were you at Kaneohe?
that was 2003 to mid five.
K Bay was pretty nice. I was over in Schofield in Hawaii, so I was there
Okay.
from '96 to
Some training out
2000.
there at Schofield Barracks.
Yeah, my brother-in-law was stationed out at K Bay, so I went out there quite a bit. It was nice, and I'm sure it only got nicer because they were trying to fix a lot of it up. Let's move a little further into your career. I want to talk about, first off, you being a line infantry to be big Marine, I guess as big as you could say big Marine, and going into those line units. I want to talk about kind of the mindset that you're going into with them, what you're looking to kind of gain out of it, because I have a feeling that this is where you've settled in and have decided 20 years is going to be your life, but you haven't quite decided on that special operations route yet.
Right. So I would say where that came. So let's see. It was right after I left, when I left the actual last line unit, and I got bamboozled, as I say, from the career planner. And I went to a place called CBRF. Is the acronym. It's a chemical biological incident response force out of Indian Head, Maryland. And in Centaurus they make Tomahawk missiles there, whatever that. But it wasn't a security gig. It was for the actual the chem bio side of things. So like you got your decontamination platoon, and they call it recon, but it's just testing radiation and stuff like that. And there were some cool parts of that in its own right. But I was sold it was like security forces and CQB with the gas mask on is how it was sold, and that was not what it was. I mean, got to do some things like President Ford's funeral, Stadium Union address, stuff like that. Work with New York firefighters, a couple other fire departments out of Indiana, and I actually, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I actually got my ass chewed from their first sergeant on top of his desk type thing, telling me he was gonna, skull fuck me per se, because I went over his head because Quantico, Virginia is right there. And I was like, I asked to leave early. He said no. And I was like, well, the monitor's right there. So I had to go to Quantico for something. I decided to talk to the monitor. And he's like, yeah. He goes, we got a spot open in 20 Palms. Do you want to go there? And at that time, maybe it's still like that, nobody really wants to go there because it's a little bit of nowhere. The Army actually abandoned that place in 1950, and the Marine Corps was like, sounds perfect. Took it over. And I said, yeah, took it. So I got orders like a week later without telling my command, and they just chewed my ass, but orders are orders. So I got to execute them. And I didn't realize it was to a light armored reconnaissance battalion, which wasn't general infantry. It was motorized infantry, right? And I was like, oh, well, that's more diverse than what I had been doing between security forces and then infantry for, several years, and then going into, well, what Seabirth was, but that only ended up being about a year and a half to 2 years because I got out early or left early. But went there, and actually I got to grow pretty good from there. And when I was looking from there, and at that point, I knew I didn't want to do that. I was good at my job and I was getting promoted just fine. You know, like you said, at the time, regular conventional, I always told my guys, keep your mouth shut, do what you're told, and don't get in trouble. Like, don't get a DUI and stuff, and you'll be just fine, right? And so I was going through the ranks and doing good, and I was on my last ended up being the last point with them on a MEU, and I was like, okay, I need something different. And I was like, I always wanted to go, and I tried a lat move before that to recon at the time when MARSOC first opened up. I can't remember which one, I'm getting it backwards, but one of them wasn't taking staffing. Says I literally just promoted. I went to an E6 staff sergeant, and they weren't taking it, and the other ones were. And then when I tried again, it was the opposite because I tried to go to recon first. They weren't taking E6s, and then all of a sudden MARSOC had opened it up to at that time, and so I was like, well, I made a deal with myself. Not quite a deal with the devil, but I was like, hey, if I pass selection, I'll stay in. If I pass, I'll re-enlist. And that was what I told myself, because at that time I was at my 9-year mark or 8-year mark.
Yeah, once you cross that 10-year threshold,
Yep.
you're pretty much locked in.
Yeah, I just knew that after, assessment selection and then ITC, just that whole pipeline together, you're looking at 9 months to a year, right? And I was like, well, I'm going to be right there at that threshold, and plus the obligation of becoming a CSO, you have a 5-year obligation after that anyway. So
the interesting part about your career to me is you were infantry. You told him infantry from the beginning. I would think your career would pretty much go down an infantry path because, if we look at it, you were in the Marines for 20 years, but if you look at it, if you really try, you can make your career do that. You were never, to me, in my opinion, a conventional infantryman. You did all kinds of stuff that involved infantry stuff, but also involved military police stuff, security forces, all that kind of stuff. You did all these different things. Do you think that helped you when you decided on this career in special operations, because you had seen how good it could get, how bad it could get, and all the different realms that you could possibly be in?
actually, that you mentioned, looking back, I never thought about it that way. And I do think, because looking at the different aspects of what I did through that outside your regular like groundwork on infantry, right? But then you also got the surveillance side of security forces, because I got to work counter surveillance stuff with a Secret Service while I was in DC as well, all the way to LAR, where not only did I get to run a light infantry with 242 Bushmaster chain gun, which is a really fun weapon, but also got to run their 81 section and the AT variant. So just getting the different weapon systems without it having to be your primary MOS like in conventional infantry. So I got exposed to those different attributes in MOSs without having to be as a primary school. And it just gave me a well-rounded perspective going into the special operations side of the house.
Do you think it made you a better special operator?
I do. And that being because having an understanding, at least a base understanding of how each of those worked without having to start from ground zero. So I think it gave a leg up from there as far as experience goes.
Talking about special operations, you to me have never seemed like a boisterous guy about what they've done, where they've been, kind of how they handle their business. Would you agree that in a special operations environment, or even an 0311 environment to an extent, you have to be that kind of person?
Yeah, it's always about being humble in your beginnings and being that silent professional. That's preached from day one, right? And, everywhere from operational security to being above reproach with all around you, and being that beacon or that example to set for others to emulate.
So my question would be to that then, in how you say that. Don't you think though that personality you have to have a little of that in you, whether it ever leaks out, whether anybody ever sees it. In order to survive in that dominating world, that alpha world, you have to think highly of yourself, or you have to be able to think quickly on your feet and know how good you are at your assigned position. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
I think the question that a lot of people have is they see the difference in people. They'll see loud people in it. They'll see quiet people in it. You being one of those quiet people, how do you go your whole career just staying under that? I know you said you're taught from the very beginning, but I feel like there's a deeper answer to it of how you can be so humble and carry on throughout your career.
So there's a fine line I learned between, you got the squeaky wheel gets the grease, because they just want to, they'll talk all the game to cover up what they don't know, that type of thing. And it's going to bother me now because I can't think. There's a certain saying that I wanted to say, and it's blowing my mind right now.
Maybe we'll do an extra at the end. We'll put in a little blurb at the end and say, "Oh, he figured it out. This is the saying." So, or maybe we'll just add it in.
Cognitive recall is a bitch sometimes.
Well, and we'll talk about that because there's reasons behind that. I want to talk about a couple of guys that you mentioned to me before the show that I had no idea that you knew. Nick Jones, Prime Hall, same kind of guys. Mm-hmm. Do the job, do what they need to do, and they just kind of move on with it. Was there ever a point, and I don't want to go into specifics of who they were or anything, but was there a point where you were rubbed wrong by either someone of a higher position than you or someone in your same position that just did not extol those virtues on everything around them?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely no way. I'd be lying if I said I went that whole time without, someone in that, or in the same position rubbing you the wrong way. And in most of the time it comes from almost a respect side, is because they're just too bullish on, well, I'm saying it because I'm right. Just because they're, and most of the time, maybe in the case they are mostly right, but they didn't want to hear another perspective on the fear of being wrong, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. So let's talk about how you deal with that, because once again, when we go back to that world that you're in a special operations kind of world, mistakes can be very costly. So how do you move through that, being a quieter person and knowing that that's out there and knowing that those answers can't be because that person is worried about looking wrong in front of people? How do you approach situations like that? And how do you teach the people around you to approach situations like that?
So part of our approach is is you always show them, right? Is show them why you're right, per se. Like I said, the proof's in the pudding. You actually run the different scenarios, or, whether it's a physical fitness event or a strategic thing or planning out operations. And this is why you do training and go through those scenarios. And that was one way I did it, is just showing the consistency in that always seemed to prevail for me. And as far as, going in and teaching someone younger about that, is just, making sure that it's almost, I don't want to call it like a lawyer, but that's the only analogy I can think of right now, is making sure they're, T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and being 100% on their information when you put that out versus just talking it, right? So never come to a problem without a solution is one thing I always told younger guys. Don't come to me with a problem if you don't have a solution for it, or at least have an idea of a solution to help mitigate that.
Let's talk about your later on in your career before you go over to special operations. 2006 is when the Raiders come kind of back online. They're reestablished. There was a lot of success with Detachment 1 in Iraq, and that kind of reignited that Marine Raider. Coming over to that, you're at the kind of front of it because it's 2006 when you're coming over. You have a lot to bear doing that. It's a huge risk because you go to recon, those guys have been around. There's a couple different kinds of recons. You could fly under the radar. As a Marine Raider, and especially in an establishing unit, being a staff NCO, there's no flying under the radar. Everything is in a fishbowl. So let's talk about that pressure of not only becoming a special operator, but you've got the eyes of the Marine Corps and the eyes of the Pentagon on you the entire time, everything you're doing.
Yeah, man, it was a lot. I mean, there was anxiety was at its high for sure. It was just always just the feeling of always constantly being on and just continuous, like even back in CONUS, I mean, not including all the training and then schooling out and deploying, just when you're back and you're supposed to be your downtime, you're still pushing 12-hour days, 18-hour days, just to make sure things were wired tight, to make sure that we were going to be successful. So that way, one, we could keep furthering the Raider name and also, creating that legacy that was once there from World War II. Because when I first came in, I think I was the third class, maybe fourth of ITC, and it was when it was out of like red trailers, and there was no established building yet of the Marine Raider Training Center. There was, we didn't even have an MOS yet. We actually got the MOS of 0321 Bravo, Alpha or Bravos. They put a letter at the end of it, so we weren't considered recon, but we were an Alpha or Bravo. And then, there was no PIN designation. None of that was established yet. So seeing that come to fruition, I think in 2015 is when the name and the device was finally approved. So it was, like you said, 6-7 years under scrutiny until we finally got that forward.
And let's be honest, there were hiccups along the way to that 2015.
Yeah.
There were very much in the news worldwide with the Raider name attached to it. I've talked to a couple of those guys on here. I think that with so much stress on it, that those guys almost don't get a fair shake on stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it was like, and part of that stress, because we had part of what you just said there is like we had enemies on all sides. It seemed like our own, I guess, our own flesh, like being a Marine. We had, the flagpole per se of big Marine Corps did not like us. They did not like the idea of us. They didn't even want that. Just from what I heard, right? Like it got put out there to the Marine Corps. They initially said no because we're, all Marines are special. Like every Marine's a rifleman type deal. And Secretary of Defense, I think Donald Rumsfeld at the time says, you will give us a special operations entity. And that was that. So like we had the guys that didn't like us because they thought whether we were going to act like, Joe Cool or something like that, but that was never the case. But it's just, you had the people that didn't like the idea of it, and they were stuck in their ways, and they would just never be accepting no matter how good we did. And then the stress on that too is like, not only were we trying to make a name for ourselves, but MARSOC as a unit, we didn't have a niche, right? Like, you got Army SF, they're more, foreign internal defense. And then you got, SEALs, they're more on the, the water side, right? Or what have you. And then you got like, Delta, whatever, it's all CQB or, whatever teams you want to put out there. And then, but we didn't have a niche. And so it's like, we were accepting any and every mission. It didn't matter if it was a shithole of country or not, to gain that AO, to gain the operational space for MARSOC to, own that piece, if you will.
Yeah. So let's go a little deeper on that then. You're accepting any mission going anywhere. Now, if I'm correct, you already have a pump under your belt. You've already been in combat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
So here's the thing. When you go to that combat, can we say it's conventional with how you win? It's a conventional warfare kind of thing. So now you're over in special operations. You guys have no niche. You're volunteering for anything that comes down the pipe. One, I think you would agree that can be a very dangerous option to do. There is a necessity for it to show that you guys are willing and able to pull off any job that needs to be done. It's also very dangerous, like we talked about, being in the fishbowl of if it goes sideways on you, it's going to go bad sideways on you. So can you talk a little bit about that, of saying, yeah, we'll do all this, and then when something goes wrong, you're like, okay, here's why it went wrong, because this isn't in place, this isn't ready. Can we kind of talk about that? Because you're fighting an almost unwinnable fight.
Yeah, and I guess a little example about that is one time we were staged in Guam, and we were working a long time. One of the, I think Unit 3, one of the SEAL units, and so because we were using like SWIC and whatnot, and as the boats, right? Even though we had our own boats, but not the actual SWIC boats, right? And it was like, oh, hey, we're gonna stand up a maritime team as well, which it's nothing that, I mean, we've done it before, but it like was our niche. But it was just one of those things where it's like we were doing this whole workup, not necessarily doing that, and then we go here and it's like, okay, now let's do this. But then we actually didn't deploy anywhere to do that, and that's part of the example is like we were literally willing to pivot whichever way we needed to do to gain access to to get those missions to prove our name.
You're talking 2006 to 2015 before you're, let's say, formally recognized as Raiders. Mm-hmm. Does it ever piss you off in that time period of, guys, we're going on almost a decade of busting our ass out here. We're still not being formally recognized. Or does it fall back to that thing with you where it's the quiet professional and, okay, maybe someday they'll get to it? Or, I mean, can we be real and talk about, does it piss you off at some point?
Looking back at it, I mean, hindsight, I think it pissed me off more that way versus during. During, there was still some naivety to it. It was like, okay, this is, what we need to do. Like we looked at it as this was our task, purpose, mission to be established. So we were willing to push forward and do whatever we do while keeping our mouth shut per se. Obviously open our mouths when we needed to, but just getting it done and letting our guys know, like, hey, let's just push through this and get this done, and the reward's going to be there. It's almost like, hey, where's the goal at the end of the rainbow? And we just inherently believe that, and we knew that we trained well enough and in all facets of special operations as a whole that we could get the job done no matter what they threw at us. And part of us took pride in that. As far as I think as a whole we do, not trying to speak for all Raiders, but I think we take pride in like, hey, it doesn't matter what segment or niche you give us or phase of special operations, we truly believe we could get it done. Not only get it done, but do it better.
Okay. So when you say a goal, and you're very big on goals, we've talked about that a couple times so far. When they keep moving the goalpost on you, though, it's got to be frustrating. Hey, just do this and we'll be recognized. Nope. Just do this and we'll be recognized. It's got to be frustrating at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Fucking politics, man.
And I want to get into that in a little bit because I think ultimately that's what started pushing you towards getting out is politics. In everything that I've read, everything that I've heard, I really feel that it wasn't the job. It wasn't the clowns. It was the circus. Let's go a little deeper into this. So you and I talked offline, 2 MEUs, 3 combat rotations into Afghanistan. You have another rotation. I want to talk about you being in a line infantry unit, you being in very conventional warfare. You get to be an infantryman in war. Do you go in it with a little bit of, like you just said about the MARSOC, was naivety? And what kind of person are you as you come into this role? I'm talking about your first time that you go into combat. I mean, you were making punji pits when you were a kid. So now you're getting to do it for real. This is everything you've trained for. This is everything that you came in for. Let's talk about who you are as you first do your rotation into combat.
There was excitement for sure. Everybody was like, motivated, like, hell yeah, we're going to do this. Let's go, kill the bad guys. Right. And then the reality of it sets in. It's like, it's scary as shit. It's like, the adrenaline rush is unlike no other. And some people chase that. And I would agree there's times where I chase it too. When you start seeing the adverse side of that go down, and it's like, okay, let's rethink this now. What are we doing? Right. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, but.
Okay. I'm going to break it down a little more. The first time that combat becomes real to you, of course, flying over there, everything is real when you deploy over there, all that kind of stuff. But the first time you look around, like you just said, when you said it's scary as shit, and you go, holy shit, that just happened. That's like a real thing that just happened, and it's going to happen multiple times.
Yeah, actually, I do remember a point. I think the point where it was that real for me is where were we at? We were somewhere in Cornwall Valley. It's the same valley that the Bear Went Over the Mountain was written about, where the Russians met their demise against the Taliban, right? And we got into an engagement there where we were, going through a village and whatnot. And, we got into some hostile acts. We took some, EPWs, whatever. We were getting the questioning. And then it wasn't that. It was later that afternoon when kind of the dust settled and everybody was relaxing and calm. And they, decided to conjure up a counter strike against us. And we were at the disadvantage because we were almost like in a bowl. And then it was just a ridge line up on top. And they had 105 shooting down at us, RPK machine gun fire, all the above, right? RPGs ran down in the little courtyard, and we just stopped and thinking, I was like, where's that going to land next? And they were just like walking it down, and it was just like a very huge pucker factor. And that was when the absolute realness came in. And even though there was some firefights and stuff like that before, and that was a few months into deployment, and that was when it would really smack me in the face, was like, okay, let's make some smart decisions here and get this done.
So do you think, and I'm going to use a term that might be too strong, but do you think at that point you become hypervigilant or start to be hypervigilant, or do you think that you're just kind of ramping the dial up a little?
I think it's both, if I may say so.
Okay.
It's definitely ramped up, but I do remember being in a higher state. Like it was like, it didn't matter every step you took, because it was starting to get, it was like during a dusk, right? And going out, it was just like every little sound, it was like that hypervigilant style. It wasn't just being aware. It was like, okay, where's everything at? Where's that coming from? Let's check it out. Just always completely being on edge, just through rotations and not sleeping much, and just realizing that literally the enemy could be anywhere, especially like, they don't dress in, conventional uniforms over there. So that's when it was really like, okay, anybody here could be hiding a weapon under a man dress, right?
Do you ever, and this is going to be kind of a strange question. I don't want to ask, did you ever second guess your decisions that you made in doing what you did? I don't think that's it, but did you ever think like, maybe this is more than you signed up for?
No.
Does it almost harden you into your stance of why you, and the reason I ask that is because when you say no, does it almost harden you into, yeah, this is exactly what I signed up for. This is exactly who I am. I knew this when I was a junior in high school. This is who I am, and I was right way back then.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a definite correlation with that. And like I said, in that moment, it was like, okay, like I said, I wasn't second guessing my whole life or cowering down into a ball and, wanting to go home. It was like embracing it, embracing the fear factor and the suck of what it was or what other people just think is the worst thing in the world. And there's times, and some people think, everybody says about Marines anyway, but us, it was like, oh, you're not right in the head. And it's like, because we'd go through situations like that and you make jokes or laugh because it's like what gets you through. It's your brothers beside you. And so I think absolutely in those moments really set my way forward. Like I knew I was staying in after that. Actually, I think it was a month or two after that incident I'm telling you about, I actually enlisted in Afghanistan. And at that point, I'm like, okay, this is going to put me past, up to 8 years. So I knew at that point I was at least going another 4.
And see, that's what is so interesting to me about your career and why I asked, did you ever think that? Because I believe in everything that I've read about you. You never did second guess it. But it's funny that once again with you, there's such a crazy thing where you start ramping that dial up, that hypervigilance. We start talking about that and you go, it'd be a good idea. Why don't I do 4 more years of this? And when people say like you just said, people say you aren't right, But I almost think that you're exactly right where you need to be because you know that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly felt that. I was like, hey, this is my place, this is where I need to be, and this is what I'm supposed to do. I felt that's exactly what my mission was in life, or at least during that time. And then going forward to that next, and then just wanting more, like, hey, I know I'm good at this job, and I felt like, and I knew I could have went forward in the regular conventional side and been fine, but I knew past the rank of staff sergeant, once you become a E7 in the conventional Marine Corps side, you're just dealing with logistics, being bolts and band-aids, and that's it. And outside of the whole Rambo as a kid thing, I know in special operations or on that side, you can operate all the way to retirement.
So let's go a little deeper into that. When you know that there's kind of no advancement, here's that thing again where I've told you over and over in this conversation. You see a road, but you know, oh shit, I better get off this one real quick and get onto this other one. You noticed it there in your career too. Like, hey, I'm going to stall out if I don't do something. What kind of position does that put in your mind? Because I don't think a lot of people look at their careers like that. They don't think about, oh, I'll stall out here or I might have to do this. They just go, I'll do it. And then, just kind of whatever happens, happens. What made you start thinking about all that stuff? Because you're thinking way ahead. You're thinking 4 and 5 chess moves ahead.
I think for me, I just didn't want to become stagnant. And I always wanted to have a avenue or a way to always continuously improve. And I felt that was my best way of doing it. And also not only proving to myself, I didn't feel like I needed to prove it to anybody else. I mean, like my family and loved ones, they were all proud of me and thought it was enough and wish I would have got out, 5 years before I did type thing. But it was just that wanting to continually self-improve, as it's like one of my virtues is always be learning, always, educate yourself. Right.
All right. So here's the question then. You just mentioned family and all of that kind of stuff. You didn't do it to prove to yourself, but you knew that you needed to do this. How are the relationships around you at that time? Are they good? Do you feel like everything is healthy around you? Job is good? Because of course the job is good. You just re-enlisted for 4 years. But is everything else around you good?
Yeah, I say outside of wanting to prove to myself, I actually did have that internal support from my now ex-wife. The support was there. She did support me in doing that outside of everything else, because that was still within my first 2 years of marriage, I think, at the time, 2 or 3 years. And so it was inherently there, or at least I thought it was there. But going into it, I don't know if it was just, the tempo or part of the disengagement for myself from being all in on the special operations side to making sure what we talked about previously, making sure everything was wired tight and that we weren't, ensuring success so we wouldn't fail. And just knowing the ramifications that come with that, because you're in much smaller teams going forward and you don't have, you have a lot of supporting assets, yes, but you're not with a bunch of dudes, right? So it started to dwindle the more and more I was gone. And then how basically all that pressure and anxiety started to affect me as a person. I didn't even realize that until probably year 16, 17 in, and I was like, oh shit, I'm not myself. I was not being the best version of myself, to put it lightly.
Let's talk about that. Let's go back for just a minute, because I want to go down this thread a lot. Let's go back to that. You just said that when you make this decision, you kind of have to, it's to prove to yourself. The problem with that answer is you have to prove to yourself. It becomes all about yourself, all about your team, and everything else in the world is shut out. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not here to say that. And I don't think you're here to say that either. But you got to talk about you personally, because this is the most interesting part of your career to me. You double down on it. You re-enlist. You do everything you can to go into this. and you close everything else out in the world. So we got to talk about that, because it's got to be a strange feeling, whether it's at the end of your career or whether it's while it, where you take a breath and look up for a second and go, oh shit, no one's here. It's just me and the team.
Yeah, you're right. and and part of me was wondering, it's like, did I push it that way, or well, I mean, yeah, I did, because it was exactly what it was. It was like that's all I focused on. That's all I cared about was the guys. It was me and the guys, and that was it. And it was like the marriage was a byproduct at the time, and just like the true Marine Corps fashion, being born in a bar, right? Like, that was how we celebrated. It's like, everybody talks about when they get out of the military that they forget who they are and what they even like doing or as hobbies, and which is true. I'm not speaking for everybody, but for me it was, because it was like, what did we do? It's like anytime we had off, which wasn't a lot, it was like, how did we celebrate? We broke bread by, going to a bar or drinking beer, or any outing always revolved around that. And it just got deeper and deeper. Whereas, like, you get done with shooting package before going home, you've been up for days on end, but you'd still crack a few beers with the boys before you go home to see your family.
So I got to ask with you, because from everything I understand from your past, I mean, you were close with family, you had friends, you had all that kind of stuff. How does it feel? And I know you said you noticed it later on, but how does it feel to have your world just kind of close in and be tight?
So as far as the team aspect, it's amazing. It's that brotherly and brotherhood that you build and develop, and essentially it's what you live for, is because, like, you have each other's back, and you are family. That's what you created, is that continuity and that basically brotherhood that you have, like lifelong kinship. So I mean, it's I think it's amazing on what the outcome of that is. However, it doesn't come without sacrifice something. You can't go all in on something and then not have something falter.
Do you regret taking it that far? I don't mean do you regret your job. Do you regret taking it that far?
I would say at times I do. Now, the end state, without going down in the weeds of what ended up happening, and what the final straw was that broke the camel's
Of
back, and
course.
why we separated and divorced, it was, I think if I wouldn't have taken it far, maybe it would have helped. But actions that were taken, I don't think it would have changed the result. But I would say there might be just small regret, like, hey, if I would have done it differently, would have it came out differently. But at the same time, I also believe everything happens for a reason, and I had to go through all those trials and tribulations then to get to where I'm at now as well.
Okay, so let's contrast and compare two words: selfish and self improvement. Which one is it?
Self improvement.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it then, because I think that's the problem with law enforcement, with first responders, with military, is people on the outside of that world look in, and the word they use is, that's selfish. It's selfish because you constantly think about that. I was
Yep.
hoping you would say self improvement, because I want to know how you explain it, because it's a very hard definition to make when you're not in the middle of it.
It is. And how I try to explain it sometimes, because I have absolutely heard that before, and like, well, it's almost selfish, or they think you're being selfish. And it's like, if I don't do this and innovate and train hard and build that bond and go forward with those things I'm doing, and that you're seeing in a selfish light, we're looking at it, if we're not continuously improving each other, ourselves, and the team, then we're dead. And I'll put it very bluntly like that. And someone's like, oh, well, that makes sense. It's like, it's either something bad's going to happen and people don't return, or it could have been prevented, or, you know, someone else gets hurt. So it's either protecting, someone outside, like you said, for service wise, whether it's civilians get hurt or innocents or your teammates or yourself.
So how do we bridge that gap? Because here's the thing. You say it's self-improvement, and I completely agree with you. The problem with that is a lot of people, and I won't give a percentage to it, in the end of those careers come to it, and it was self-improvement for all those years. And guess what happened? All that self-improvement didn't do shit on the backside of it. Because once they're done self-improving for that mission, they're not self-improved on the inside. No hobbies, you said it. Nothing they like to do, no one they like to hang out with, nowhere they like to travel to. We've got to figure out a way to bridge that gap. I want your thoughts on how we do something like that in all of those different worlds, because I think that they come out of those worlds and they feel very foreign and they feel very different than the world that they're coming into.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like there's so many different ways you can go with that. I know there could be a lot to unfold here, or peel back the onion, if you will. And yeah, coming to the end of it, you're I say you'd feel like a lost toy. You come at the end and it's like you don't know who you are, what you like doing, what your hobbies are again. Your relationships are estranged by that point. You feel like you have no purpose anymore. Like you don't have that purpose or why, because you're like, well, I knew what I was doing this whole time. And then you get out and you don't have a sense of direction anymore. And in part of that, I would put some onus or blame on the full military construct of not allowing people enough time, or at least not that they won't allow that time, but they don't push it. They don't say, hey, you're getting out in a year, or you're retiring in 2 years. Why don't you start thinking about this? Or let's set you up here to do this. There's no foresight on that because here's that word selfish. It's a very selfish institute, even though they look at it as improvement because, hey, we want our best guys on it to do so. So it's kind of comes full circle there.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was going to say when you're talking about that. When you say that they allow it, but they don't push it, because their job, just like you, is to provide the best product available, to provide the fastest mission availability to do. They're
Absolutely.
not really concerned on the backside whether you're okay. But I think it's a huge problem, and I think it is in law enforcement and in first responders too, because as a whole, the organization thinks so much about the mission that they forget all the pieces inside because they're so easily replaced.
Yeah. And that's one of the saddest realizations at the end of it is everybody's expendable or a number. Even though in the special operations side, it's like, hey, you're not a number because our numbers are much fewer and there's more niches. But in the end, you're still a number. You're still going to get replaced or the next person's going to come up. And I think that's maybe a trigger in some fashion that sends some people down that dark rabbit hole of, depression or just not giving a fuck.
So let's talk about when you get into like 16, 17 years. I want to talk about, one, alcohol, if there's any kind of problems with it, painkillers by then, if there's any problem with it, pharmaceutical. And then I want to talk about just body beat up and mental just beat out of you. Let's talk about how you felt about all those things, because I think we've established about 16 years in, you start looking around like, what the fuck was this all for?
Yeah, so it was around year 17 is when I realized that I was done. Even though, wise man said, you're at 17, you got 20, you're not going to get out at 17. Um, yeah, I mean, just mentally broke down, almost feeling like a beat dog is an analogy I'll use. And just mentally wasn't there. Like you said, just feeling weak, not knowing, like just uncertainty started setting in. Like I said, turned to alcohol a lot. Like drinking was a favorite pastime, in the industry, if you will, in the service. And it got worse and worse. It would be like where, every night, you're at least a 6 pack of, and not like, bush lattes. It was like, IPAs and, anywhere, 6, 9 percenters, or doing that with whiskey or God forbid you get together with some boys during the weekday, you would burn it down. You'd still be in there the next day, but it was just a constant thing. And it was like, it wasn't drinking to have a drink no more. It was drinking to get drunk or to forget. And which is the wrong answer. But, and then you couple that with trying to get help. But the problem with the military's version of giving you help is pushing pills, which does not mix well with any of that. So then that just further made my like physical ability. I don't even know if that's a word. my my physical prowess, like physical fitness. There we go. It made that worse because I started just not caring about that, and just one thing after another just started just tumbling.
Was there ever a point in combat where, and I'm not saying like a necessary mission or anything like that, but was there ever a point on these deployments where you came to that answer, like, I'm done. Like, I've done this for I'm done doing this. Was there ever a time like that?
Never during a mission.
Okay.
Thoughts came up, but never I'm done moment.
Okay. So you weren't done with your career at any point where you were like, okay, I've done this enough. My number hasn't come up, but it's gonna. Nothing like that ever happened.
Right. No, mine came up when on my last team where I knew I was going to be retiring, and the leadership and I didn't see eye to eye on some things, and some of it was, I think, the positions were different, for lack of better terms, without putting out positions or names. And I'd been in longer than the guy that was in a higher position than me, which is fine because I would rather be on teams anyway at that point. And I actually was told after the fact, I was like, I knew he didn't like me from jump. And part of it was, and I know that was part of it. And we didn't agree on how things were done, even though missions were going to be incomplete, training objectives being met, everybody's being taken care of. But it was just finding a reason, and we finally butt heads bad enough to where I got removed. And, it's not something I was proud of at the time, or like, I'm not proud of it now. I was actually very ashamed. I actually went down a deeper, darker rabbit hole. But in the end, it was the best thing for me because I wanted to have time to take care of myself before getting out, but I still wanted to finish the mission I was on, right? And to say we agreed to disagreed, went this way. I ended up going out. I got asked to join another team, another company, and I actually respectfully declined. And a associate of mine that was the OPSO of the sport battalion asked me to be the battalion ops chief for them, which was a proverbial desk job, and which is generally, I don't know, frowned upon, but like coming from, hey, you have a choice to operate or not, you could. One thing I was afraid of, still being prideful, is like, oh, am I going to get blacklisted, right? And which thought I was at first. I mean, because a lot of people I knew were still on the East Coast anyway, but everybody that was here is like, I didn't talk to with as much. Some of the other guys I was with, I did, like older friends, but outside of that, it was like I wasn't even over there. But I made that choice because I knew that was my best option to still impact change for the enablers and the structure that was going to go in around those teams to make them successful. I could still do that while taking care of myself, going to, the TBI clinic, going to the Honor Foundation, and then subsequently getting introduced to the USC MPV program. That gave me a solid 2 years and able to set myself up for success.
Let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
You never leave that team. You don't disagree with that guy. How's it turn out different?
I've wondered that myself, to be honest with you. Honestly, the way I think it might have turned out, it might have implemented a extension so I had enough time, to make sure you had those certain things done. Or what would have happened is I might have been able to get a couple of those things done, but I guarantee you it wouldn't happen like that. I would not have had that time window that by choosing going over to the dark side, if you will, that it would have gave me on the other side. If I stayed with the team, I might have had 6 months preparation to get out max.
Let's look beyond the transition stuff. You as a person,
Mm-hmm.
how do you come out? I'm not talking about the transition. I'm not talking about the honor foundation. I'm not talking about the master's program. I'm talking about you as a person, the guy that has to look at himself in the mirror. How do you come out different?
From doing the preparation?
Yeah, from let's say you never leave the teams. Let's say you never become the ops chief. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
you run and gun until your last day.
I'd say probably a shit show, to be honest with you. I think I would have came out with less direction. And obviously I'm speaking for myself. It's just I know where I was at that time. If I'd have continued that path, I would have came out like that, or, you know, maybe even worse, because if I'd have taken medications I were being pushed on going down that side of the house, I mean, it could be fatal. And I'm
Yeah.
not trying to be dramatic about that, but I've had too many close friends that were in the same boat and they chose that path for.
Did you ever contemplate?
I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it.
Okay.
Um, I never had enough. I know I always said I was too chicken shit to ever do something like that. I know that sounds that's supposed to be a joke, but
No, it points out something when you say that you had thoughts about it, but you could never go through with it. Because the
mm-hmm.
question that I want to ask you about that is what do you think that, and maybe you don't know, what do you think that it is for those guys that pushes them over the limit and they go, yeah, this is the best way to solve this problem?
You know, my immediate answer is I don't know. A theory or thought is, you know, they're in that cycle of depression and they put that professional pressure on themselves. And on top of the anxiety, being like, I need to do this and I need to be the best. I need to be the best. This ain't good enough. Gotta do better. I gotta do more. I gotta do more. I gotta do more. I gotta do more. Fuck, I can't do more. I'm gonna let everybody down. And it just, that's how it goes through my head.
I mean, you said that's how it goes in your head, but was that kind of the same process with you?
Yeah, very similar.
Okay. So let's talk about getting out then, because I want to focus on a couple different things. One, I want to go back to what we were talking about selfish or self-improvement. You got to tell me the difference when you get out. Now you're really trying to self-improve. And what I mean by that is you're not trying to better the teams. You're not trying to better the mission. You're actually trying to fucking fix yourself. You're actually trying to become the person that you need to be. So you got to tell me about the difference in self-improvement of how we talked about it before and actual looking that man in the mirror self-improvement.
All right, a lot to unpack there. One, there was a lot of trigger points from going through, because one of the first things I did do after going over to that position was going through the Honor Foundation, which I actually am very thankful for, as far as, because it's a special operations transition course, right? That's 3 months long, twice a week, versus your 1 week of TAPS and TAMPS. And they go through everything. I mean, everything from career discovery to finding the golden thread, peaks and valleys, finding your why, like referencing like Simon Sinek's why, doing cups of coffee, learn how to talk to people, the right questions to ask to try to develop and understand like what you want to do or whatnot. And just having that same camaraderie there and able to know it's okay to talk about things. Right. And so understanding that and having that same understanding in the room where the other like-minded people just like you, the other, you know, go-getters or alphas in the room that are like, hey, this is all I know and what I do, but I don't know what I want to do. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'd like to do anymore. It was being able to talk through that in that course and then, you know, figuring out what other alternative way do people do to help, right? Now, outside of that, for me, figuring out who are you, like who I am. I was lost. I was like, shit, I think I want to do this, but I really don't know what I want to do. So I was like, okay, well, what do you want to do for your hobbies? But the first thing first is I knew I needed it was almost like going back to childhood and figuring out from there. I was like, what did I used to like to do?
Build punji pits.
Right. So I was like, well, I've already kind of done that, so I need to do something else. Now, segueing a little from that, in order to do that, though, as you know, before you can, well said, is before you can love anybody else, you got to love yourself first. And it was very apparent at that time when I was going through, I did not love myself. Like I said, at that point, I was starting to go through separation and divorce. And I was like, what's the silver lining here? What am I missing? And I just started watching different, you know, health videos, plant medicine, etc., going down the rabbit hole there. And I made a kind of choice to stop taking any of the, you know, medicine that they were pushing, whether it's antidepressants or painkillers that were available. And even though it
Can I
may
pause
hurt,
you for just a second? Because I want to ask what I ask everyone. At that point, how many medications are you on?
I think it was 3.
Okay.
So it wasn't like an abundant, like some people have like one for every element.
Of course.
Because I was still I never liked taking medicine. So I was still very weary or uneasy about it. But I want to say it was 3 at the time. And I was like, okay, well, then side effects are coming off it and this and that. So it was like, I think I took like 2 weeks of leave or 3 weeks. So I knew there was going to be like a detox period, almost like I wanted to chain myself up in a white room, white padded room, but, and, make sure someone's there to look out for you. But then another way was I referenced plant medicine, and it was so taboo at the time. And thankfully it's starting to come a little more light now, but this was in 2019. And it's like, well, I can't tell no one about it. And honestly, at the time, I had no idea if you're going to be drug tested for it because, they lay you to believe that you can be drug tested for anything, even though it's natural medicine. So, but you still have that in your head, right? So you're like, oh shit, what should I do? And I just, at that time, I thought my health was more important. So I went and did a 3-day ayahuasca retreat. But yeah, so I did a 3-day trip there. And the thing with it is, with that medicine, you don't just take it and it's not a magic pill and it works. To me, it's incremental, where you'll notice changes. I say once a quarter, you're like, hey, this is different, or you see something in a different light, or you'll be more aware, self-aware. And the thing is, though, you still have to do the work to go along with it, whether it's journaling or just doing self-reflective pieces to continue your improvement and journey.
When you figure out all this and you figure out kind of who you are, I guess, my big question to that would be, one, you talked about in combat that you were like, oh, this is scary as shit. Like, I never thought it was going to be like this. How scary is it when you're at this point?
I don't want to say not terrifying, but it was uneasy, because like everything you knew for 20 years, right? Whether it's, you can equate it to 4 years, 10 years, 20, 30. And it's like, that's all you know. That's all you've done. You've been told when to go to work, how to go to work, 3 hots in a cot, you're ready to go. And you go out and you're like, oh, I got to do all this on my own now. And really, that's what it is. And like the institution of the military, it's great. And it takes care of you and it provides all these things. But you almost don't realize how much it actually, I don't want to say coddles a individual, but maybe that's the right word for it.
It's the right word.
It does. It coddles them, and it keeps them from being exposed to all the other responsibilities that it takes to be an adult.
I would say even better than that, coddled. I can talk about it from a law enforcement career. Is there's almost a certain sense of security. They're always going to need you. It's not a job, and we'll talk about what you do now. It's not a job like that. They're always going to need you there. It's almost like a warm blanket of security. Like, yeah, this job is always going to be here, which is a crazy thing to say because you could get fired. There's a ton of things, but there's almost a false sense of security. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes. 100% agree, because it's like it takes an act of Congress to bust you down, but even in that cases, sometimes you can still stay in, and you're getting your paycheck on the 1st and 15th of every month, and you're going to have a place to stay, and they're obligated to make sure you're taken care of as far as that aspect goes. So yeah, 100%. I would say it's a safety blanket.
So as you get out, you do these things. You have the Honor Foundation. Let's talk about them first, and kind of, we've talked about what they did. I want to talk about more of what it meant to you, because I think that's kind of the first time at the end of your career where you're like, yeah, someone's going to help me figure this out. I don't have to do this on my own. So let's talk about that. And I want to talk about something that I've kind of waited throughout this conversation. You have always in your whole career and everything that I've read about you, networking has been huge to you. Always networking. And it's how you learned about the MBV program, all of that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the Honor Foundation and what all of that networking for all those years did for you after that.
So I'm grateful for the Honor Foundation, and what it did for me outside of the connections it provided in there was exactly that key word of network. And not only just providing that sense of belonging, not having to do it by yourself, but they're giving you the tools to provide, to help you do a correct transition, plus the coaches and mentors that are available to you 24/7. And so that meant everything at that time, especially, at that time, what I was going through personally. And it provided literally avenues into any industry that I wanted to research into and able to connect to. Like, I like to tell the fun story of, it's like, hey, this was right before COVID hit. So the COVID BS messed this up, but I was I always love sports. So I'm like, well, maybe I need to look into like sports operation or this and that. So I was literally talking to the, president of the LA Kings, Luck Robitaille, who's a Hall of Famer hockey player, if you're familiar. And it's like we had like an hour-long conversation. I was supposed to go up and watch a hockey game with him and talk about that. And it was all set up, and then COVID hit, so that sucked. And then other things, reaching out and just talking to just people that were in that space. And just because you talk to one, then you talk to another one. I talked to people from everywhere from the Pittsburgh Pirates to the Kings to San Francisco 49ers to you name it, and NASCAR, just to understand more of what they do, to see if maybe that's something I would like doing. And I stayed a little bit more on the operational side of the house just because I was familiar with it. So those are just a few examples of like what it provided as far as tools and access and mentorship and access, really, because they're a phenomenal program. And it goes back to like when they talk about, because everybody is referenced where it's like you forget what you like doing or what you enjoy doing at the end of a military career. And so pulling those golden threads and telling stories in that program brought up like, hey, what do you enjoy doing? It's like, well, I was an avid home brewer. And outside of the drinking side, I love the craft side of it, right? Actually making something for whether it's your enjoyment or someone else enjoying it, almost like a chef, right? So I like that. So I started looking into that industry as well. And even though I didn't know exactly which way I was necessarily going to go, because they also take you on site visits. I forgot what they call it, a business trek. That's what they call it. You do a local one, and then you do like a 3-day one. Ours was in Portland, Oregon. And we went to like Columbia, Adidas, and Nike. We went to Nike as well. And so we went to like those different institutions and got to talk to their, VPs and managers and do a Q&A session and whatnot, just to kind of pull out what you wanted to see if you're into that. We also went to the North America headquarters of Airbnb at the time. So there's a lot of cool connections as far as that to help you like unfold what expand your umbrella of what you either think you want to do or maybe what you like to do or something new that you didn't even think of before.
So you move on to USC, MBV program, that tactical Trojan helmet behind you.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about that, man. That's your first, I think, real foray into a completely different world than what you have been used to. And there's been tons of guys on this show, Mark Green, Ty Smith. There's a ton of guys that have been on here that have been through that program. and they can't speak highly enough about it. The thing that has always struck me that's crazy about it is that's a whole different world. That's 180 degrees in a different direction. You're on a college campus in a liberal state, and it's a different world than you've been in. How is it you stepping into that world the first day and looking around, or even the first month, the first year stepping into that?
I was nervous. I mean, it's so funny, like even thinking back to that, it's like, oh, it's like I've done this, you've done briefings with, generals and, going through the special operations, doing all this stuff on your own in austere environments. And it's like, but I'm nervous about, like you said, going into that realm because it's so unfamiliar, such unfamiliar territory. But went into it also with the excitement because I knew I was getting that much closer to getting out, and I know it's a good school, and it was so thrilled to even get into it and find out about that program. And what made just the small transition of attending and being there is, like I said, the MBV stands for, it's Master of Business for Veterans. So there was at least that correlation there where it gave you that little bit of a security blanket to where it's like, okay, I can lean on these guys a little bit as far as a familiarity, not saying lean on them for like, depend on them, but, someone you could talk through with it, or at least hoping to. But I found that within that program, though, like everybody there is there for the right reasons, and they want to, grow their network and get that education.
I would ask, after the Honor Foundation, after you retire, after you receive all that, MBV, all of those kind of things, are you at a point where you start feeling like, yeah, this is the person that I want to be? Because we talked about so long ago in combat where you're like, yep, this is what I was supposed to do. Are you reaching a point now by getting the masters and all of that kind of stuff where you're going, yep, this is who I am now. This is who I need to be right now?
Yeah, I felt more at home, or at least it was what I was supposed to be doing, considering I was still active duty when I was doing it. So I was the battalion ops chief. Then on the weekends, I was kind of like a weekend warrior up at USC. And it was post Honor Foundation. So I went from thinking, hey, I'm going to do maybe something with Nike or something in the operational world of that, right? Or in sports operation management. And then I started thinking about like timelines and stuff like that of what it takes to doing that. And it's not that it was an easier route, but I started thinking about like, well, I don't want to be under talking about the politics of it. Don't want to be start from bottom and go here, right? And I literally went from transition there to it was the entrepreneurship class at USC. There's a class of that in each semester, and it really opened my eyes to something I loved and what could actually be possible. And it was like, oh wow! So it really made me feel at home, like being able to start putting it together. And the cool thing about that program is you could either use something factual or something made up. And I took it like for real. Like I made something like, hey, I want to build a brewery. So learning all that business acumen and the framework of what it entails to build a business plan or financial feasibility analysis and stuff like that. It was really cool seeing like what is possible and what you need to do to get there. Or, I mean, the work that goes behind it, which is a crap ton, but I felt really good in that space going forward.
Let's talk about IQ, military IQ. When you got out, you were at the top of your game. You were with a very elite unit. When you come across, and now we're talking about your business IQ and your acumen and all that kind of stuff. Do you think you're at that level yet, or do you think you have a lot more to go in that IQ?
I know I have a lot more to go.
Okay, so let's talk about how you know that.
I know that because I would say there's something either new every day or every week. I mean, there's always something new comes like, oh, that's either making me better or I didn't know. Or I swear it's every other month something comes up. It's like, oh, I know this because either of this mess up or a mishap, or just like I said, the simple thing of I didn't know or didn't know enough ahead of time to research something. Well, hey, if I'd have done that, could have done this better. If I'd have done that, this would, I mean, it's same trial and error process, except a little bit more full speed because there's nobody else around, above me except for my two business partners with me.
Well, let's talk about that. I'm glad you brought that up because it's a great transition. Something that we didn't talk about that came out of the MBV program was your business partners and with stuff that you had done. Let's talk about how you met with them, how you came up with this idea, because I think your idea originally was a beer brewery. Let's talk about you changed it over. You're still brewing coffee, but let's talk about how you came up with the difference and how you chased that dream of being a craftsman, of giving your product to the world and watching people enjoy it.
So starting with how we met, it was actually mid before our final semester. So they also do like a MBV information session in multiple cities throughout Southern California. And there was one in San Diego. And since I live down here, they asked the current students to come and talk on a panel to like, because it's also to get people to obviously join the course and to speak on it. And Eric Johnson, the founder and CEO of Trident Coffee, he goes to the one every year that's in San Diego. And he heard me speak and talked about my love of craft beer and my background and all that stuff. And he came up and we were shooting the shit afterwards and said, hey, you should come down and visit and whatnot. And then I don't remember if it was in that moment of that conversation. I think it was exchange information. But then I reached back out and I was like, hey, they got the deity skill bridge, but they also have the Warrior SOCOM Care Coalition program, which is the same thing, but easier to facilitate actually. And I was going through the SOCOM one. And I was like, hey, would you guys do this? He goes, well, we don't do, he was more than happy. He's like, yeah, come on down and work with us. And so we did that one because they didn't do skill bridge, but the Warrior Care Coalition was so easy. So if there's any smaller businesses out there looking to bring on any guys from that space, then I would say look into that. It's almost a cheat code in comparison to the skill bridge application for it. So that was really easy, quick. So I went there 6 months before, 5 months before I was getting ready to retire. I started working there, and it wasn't every day. It was like 3 days a week starting because obviously they were both in the military and they wanted to make sure I had enough time to do what I needed to do, whatever was, medical, all the paperwork and stuff that goes along with it, to do so. And then, but even in that time, I just automatically started seeing either deficiencies or structure that was in place or SOPs, and I started pointing it out and for long and short of it. And within 2 or 3 months, the first 2 or 3 months, I got offered a position. I originally said no because I wanted to open my own brewery, and I actually had a program set up to go through Chicago and Munich. Long story short, it didn't happen. Everything got canceled because of COVID, and then they approached me and asked me again and say, "Hey, we think you'd be an asset to this team. Come on as a partner, which would be obviously earned as the director of operations side of the house, and to implement small unit leadership with everybody, with the team, and build the structure for the operations department of Trident Coffee."
And they come from military background, so can you kind of give their background a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Eric was in the Navy for 8 years, so he was an engineer, so from the Naval Academy. And then Josh was a total of 13 years in the Air Force. He was on the security side that they have what's called the Raven program. So he was an Air Force Raven. From my understanding, they do more of the security details for a lot of the flights and dignitaries and stuff for the Air Force.
All right. So you and I have talked on the phone about coming into this world of coffee and hipsters, and it's a whole new world again. We just talked about going to USC. When you come over to this world, it's yet another world that you have to cross that threshold going into. Let's talk about how you first learn to walk in that world, and two, how you deal with stuff that maybe the old Derek wouldn't have done, or the old Derek would have handled it differently. Can we talk about how you've come into that world?
It it's like a Miley Cyrus song, coming like a wrecking ball. Uh, It was.
Do you want me to cut out that you knew a Miley Cyrus song? I can.
It's up to you.
Okay, all right. I'm just asking.
I appreciate that. I mean, if you think it's going to be added value, then go ahead. But hey, coming into it, I was definitely more rigid than what I am now, for sure. I came in and I was happy. I honestly, coming from the special operations side of the house, was an added benefit coming into this because, like I said, we got more autonomy, freedom of movement. We use a lot of first names, right? And then so that helped with the transition versus just being yut knife hand. I'm going to yell at you as loud as I can so you do what you're told. So that was really good. However, there was still part of me coming from working with just straight high performers. I mean, just on the teams, to coming in just expecting that, and that hurt me at first. It was a big learning curve, and it was also like my standard of what I wanted to be done definitely was not what other people's standards were. Because, like I said, that was all a downfall of coming from that side. So that was a huge learning curve, and learning how to cater myself on how to talk to people, even. Because some people were like, what do you mean do better? Because I definitely said that for the first year or so. I'm like, you need to do better. And it became a catchphrase with a couple of them. We're like, well, can't you just tell them to do better? it's like, all right, shut up. And I was like, oh, you technically you're not supposed to talk to people that way, apparently. And it's like, so that was a hard thing coming to terms with. And you got to get. I'm not saying just fire people and get who you want, but you got to be creative on either how you teach them how you want things done, or on how to, the whole counseling aspect of it. I actually implemented basically counselings, like from kind of like I took that from the military, right? Is giving them performance review counselings. That way I could either implement, whether kind of from a leadership standpoint or just a performance standpoint, and saying, hey, this is what metrics need to be hit. And if they're not, that basically gives you that ammo, right? So I can either find someone better, or they're going to improve or want to improve. But the only problem is with nowadays generation, a lot of it wants to be incentive based, or they come in thinking they deserve everything already. And it's like, and they have no work ethic. Now, not everybody. There's some that are some pretty remarkable individuals, but it's very few and far between, unfortunately, in my experience.
So let's talk about what the company does, because I think you take these things called mini vacations where twice a year you go and check on the beans.
We do them once a year.
Once a year, okay. But you go check on the beans. Let's just talk about like what this company does, what it means to you, and the product that you're putting out there.
So at Trident Coffee, we are a USDA organic. We specialize in nitro cold brew, and we are a full brewery concept. So it's like a niche within a niche. Cold brew is already a niche, but we are a brewery concept, just like a beer brewery would be. And I'm pretty sure it's the only one in the nation that's like that. So our tap rooms are like experienced tap rooms. So you come in, you get a cold brew off tap, just like you would a beer. And then we also have the hot espresso options and stuff like that as well. We also have a keto bakery we're very health and wellness centric, and we source from over 8 different countries right now. And just opened our 3rd tap room, actually. Our grand opening is going to be Memorial Day. So we have one in Imperial Beach, Coronado Island, and Imperial Beach. We have an online D2C store. We're nationwide with Sprouts currently. And that's all grown within the last 4 years since I came on. When I came on, we were still at Imperial Beach.
So here's the thing. I think the interesting part about you is people can get their beans or all that kind of stuff, but they can also get these 6-packs of nitro. And if you've never had nitro coffee, it's pretty amazing. And it's pretty amazing that you guys get that out to the United States, being able to ship it. What is kind of the end goal of it? What are you hoping to achieve with this? There's 3 tap rooms, so obviously you're growing. You're in with Sprouts now, but I know there has to be an end goal. We talked about this. The goalposts are set. So what are we looking at? What are we trying to do here? You being operations, what's the end goal of it?
I would say the end goal from talking with other business partners, like we have an end goal of, obviously we want to provide something for everybody to enjoy and revolutionize the coffee space as far as the experience goes. And also like with our new instant cold brew powder, which there's not one like that out there, as different nootropics and cognitive functioning ingredients in there. And then we also added hydration properties to it, and that's also a game changer with us. And I can go more into that if you'd like, but we're trying to design and develop to where, honestly, within our 5 to 7 year, call it mid long term, would be it, is to hopefully do a merger and acquisition
with
whoever.
Now let's talk about that instant cold brew that you're talking about, because you are the first to do nootropics. You got mushrooms in there. You have, I think there's ashwagandha in there.
It's lion's mane and reishi are the two mushrooms in there. You got MCT oil, the like refined coconut powder,
mm-hmm.
and then we added,
which is a keto form, right? Is why correct, it's in there, is because it's keto.
And then we have hydration properties in there, which, coffee is generally dehydrating, right? So you got instant coffee, but this is actually freeze-dried instant cold brew with those previous ingredients we talked about. And then you also have the hydration properties of sodium and magnesium to give it some hydration properties in there. So that's why I like to say we kind of revolutionized that product. And you can take it anywhere. Right now, it literally just came out, our first version of it on March 8th. And we're developing it into where it's stick packs, just like the Element or Liquid IV type stuff.
Absolutely.
So, and that's going to make it even more mobile. So not only you can take the powder anywhere, and it's just, 1 scoop a serving, and you can do it hot or cold. So we're really looking at pushing into stick packs where you can take it through TSA, you can take it on a hike, you can take it to the gym, you can take it wherever, and, big in the athletics world too, or on the sidelines or wherever you need it.
So you get mood stabilization plus your caffeine for the day. All right. We just asked what's the end goal for them. What's the end goal for you, man? What's next?
I got my fingers in a bunch of things.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I like how you said that, but okay.
Yeah, like I said, we're a weird guy. Right. No, I say, because if you stop moving, you die, right?
There you go.
Never a full retirement, right? But outside of like business wise, I won't mind. Like I'm determined, and I will open a brewery somewhere someday. So right. that is still in the plans. There's other things in the executive protection realm that I'm looking into, or creating experience with just using the special operations background with some friends to, whether it's creating experiences or just doing shooting, to keep those skills up, doing stuff like that on the side to, any other opportunities that come out there, I'm open. So that's just 2 of them that I'll talk about right now.
All right. Where can people find you? Let's talk about everywhere, social media wise, website wise. Talk about everywhere that they can come look into you.
So for the business, is the business website is tridentcoffee.com. As far as me personally, LinkedIn, my name, Instagram at Derek L. Mensen.
Okay.
I use my full name on that one.
All right. Well, that's good to know. That's everywhere that they can find you. Guys, we know everywhere we can find Derek. It was a little, had to pull it out of him, but we know everywhere that we can find him. We know everywhere that we can look into him. Now that we know everywhere that we can find him, let's talk about where we can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram, the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast. You can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations, they're in video form, at the DTD Podcast. But if you want a one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. It's got audio. It's got video. Derek's got his own page. It's got pictures of his career. It's got pictures of him after the career. It's got every link you would possibly need to find him. The website that he's belonging to, Instagram. Let's not talk about Facebook because he doesn't go there. Now that we know everywhere we can find me, dtdpodcast.net. It's going to be your one-stop shop. It's going to be the best way to find out everything that's going on this show and everything that's going to be happening on this show. And now that we know all of that, let's talk about my amazing sponsors, the guys that make this show happen. Mac Alexander over there at Mac's Belts. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. And if you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Mac's Belts. They're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. If you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and helps support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Mac Belts. It's the toughest belt on the planet. And let's talk about the Mac Buckle. It consists of 100 grams of unbreakable American stainless steel. It's engineered, designed, assembled, and machined right here in the USA by USA-built machines. And it's backed by a multi-generation formula. We've talked about my boy Mac over there a lot, and I'm telling you, he's taken over the world with this belt. It'll be the last one that you ever have to purchase. And it's great for in-the-holster carry. Anything that you want, Mac Belts can take care of it. It's a perfect solution for casual or dress wear and ideal for utility or firearms carry. Now let's talk about my sponsor of coffee, policecoffee.com. It's an officer-owned business and it's dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends and shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant, and their specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor is concerned. Their coffee's some of the best you'll find, but it also helps serve an important cause. They give back to my community. 50% of their profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. And let's talk about flavor. Everyone knows pecan's my favorite. It's a flavorful, medium-bodied coffee by the name of One Ranger, and it comes off with a smooth and sweet pecan flavor. It's probably the best combination in the world, and it's rich, sweet, nutty, and buttery, and its flavor cuts right through coffee's natural acidity to give you a smooth and satisfying coffee experience. When you go to policecoffee.com, DJ K10 will give you 10% off your order. Do not forget these guys, Max Belts and policecoffee.com. maxbelts.com, policecoffee.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. Thank you so much to Derek, man. It's been an awesome time talking to you about your career and everything you're doing right now. That's going to be the show. That's Derek. I'm DJ. This has been it. We'll see you on the next one. See ya.
Appreciate it.